Would humanity survive a nuclear war between NATO and Russia? Here's what the science says. This question has already been addressed by many scientists. Their work is surprisingly little known, probably because no one wants to think about the unthinkable in peacetime. Current nuclear weapons. The latest assessment of Russia's nuclear military capabilities states that at the beginning of 2022, Russia had an estimated 4,477 nuclear warheads, and almost 6,000 if we include retired warheads. The U.S. has a similar number of 5,500 warheads, of which 3,800 are rapidly deployable. The explosive power of these weapons is difficult to comprehend. It is estimated that around 3 million tons of TNT equivalent were detonated during World War II. By comparison, each of the UK's Trident submarines has 40 nuclear warheads equivalent to 4 megatons of TNT. This means that each submarine has more destructive power than all the explosives used in the whole of World War II. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In 1945, the U.S. attacked the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with atomic bombs, providing two real-life examples of the impact of nuclear weapons on human populations. 140,000 people in Hiroshima and 73,000 people in Nagasaki died instantly or within 5 months, due to the intense heat and ionizing radiation from the fireball. Many people within 1 kilometer of the zero zone were charred by the heat on the spot, while those within 1.5 kilometers suffered flash burns, which subsequently caused large areas of skin to peel off. Some, especially those in buildings, were left with only bones, as the intense heat evaporated the entire body. Many of the survivors, later known as hibakusha by the Japanese, suffered acute radiation sickness. They experienced bloody diarrhea, hair loss, fever, and extreme thirst. Many of them later died. In addition to direct radiation, they were also exposed to radioactive dust. The long-term effects of the radiation suffered by hibakusha have been intensively studied. Increases in leukemia and solid organ cancers have been recorded. However, the explosion of the atomic bomb was not a death sentence in itself. Among the estimated 100,000 survivors, only about 850 cases of cancer were recorded in the years that followed, and less than 100 cases of leukemia. Hiroshima and Nagasaki show that, apart from short-term ARS, long-term radiation from radioactive dust would be the least of human problems. A much more serious problem would be social collapse, famine, and the disintegration of much of the planet's biosphere. Limited nuclear conflict. Before the war in Ukraine, it seemed highly unlikely that the superpowers would clash again and brandish nuclear weapons. So many scientists began to study the effects of more limited nuclear conflicts. One study published 2 years ago looked at the likely impact of a two-pronged strike of around 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear devices on India and Pakistan's most populated urban areas. Each blast was estimated to scorch an area of 13 square meters and to produce about 5 teragrams of soot in the atmosphere due to the release of smoke from the fires. Direct human deaths under this limited nuclear war scenario were not calculated in the study, but are estimated to be in the tens to hundreds of millions. The impact on the planet would also be significant. Once in the stratosphere, the soot would circulate around the globe, blocking incoming solar radiation and reducing the Earth's surface temperature by 1.8 degrees Celsius in the first 5 years. This would be more cooling than any recent volcanic eruption, and more than any climate change in the last 1,000 years. Precipitation patterns would change dramatically, with an overall reduction of around 8%. Food exports would collapse as stocks would run out within 1 year, leaving a total of 1.3 billion people without around a fifth of their current food supplies in the 4th year. The researchers conclude that a regional conflict involving less than 1% of the world's nuclear arsenal could have negative consequences for global food security unprecedented in modern history. A 2014 study of the same scenario found that soot penetrating the stratosphere would severely damage the Earth's ozone layer and increase ultraviolet radiation penetration at mid-latitudes by 30% to 80%. This would cause severe damage to human health, agriculture, and terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, the scientists wrote. The combined cooling and increased UV radiation would put severe pressure on global food supplies and could lead to a global nuclear famine. Total nuclear war. If a world famine can be caused by just 100 nuclear explosions, what could be the result if the US and Russia exchanged several thousand warheads? A 2008 study looked at a Russian-US nuclear war scenario in which Russia would target Western countries with 2,200 nuclear weapons and the US would target China and Russia with 1,100 weapons each. This would result in a total of 4,400 warheads detonated, which would be about half of the current Russian and US stockpiles. This scenario did not involve the use of nuclear weapons possessed by other states, which have an explosive yield of 440 million tons, about 150 times the total bombs detonated during the Second World War. It is estimated that a full-scale nuclear war would directly kill 770 million people and produce 180 teragrams of soot from burning cities and forests. In the U.S., about half the population would be within 5 kilometers of a zero nuclear blast, and a fifth of the country's population would die instantly. A subsequent study published in 2019 looked at a similar, but slightly smaller, release of 150 teragrams of soot into the atmosphere. Following a nuclear war of a similar scale, such a conflict would produce so much smoke that only 30 to 40% of the sun's light would reach the Earth's surface in the next 6 months. This would lead to a sharp drop in temperature, and temperatures would remain below freezing throughout the subsequent Northern Hemisphere summer. There would be no growing season. It would be a true nuclear winter, nor would it be just a short-term spike. For several years afterwards, summer temperatures would still fall below zero. And in the third and fourth year, global precipitation would be halved. It would take more than a decade for the planet to return to a somewhat normal climate. By then, most of the Earth's population would be long dead. Global food production would fall by more than 90%, leading to a global famine that would kill billions of people. In many countries, less than a quarter of the population would survive by the end of the second year under this scenario. Global fish stocks would collapse and the ozone layer would erode. The models are frighteningly specific. In a nuclear war scenario of 4,400 warheads and 150 teragrams of soot, within 5 years of a nuclear war, the average reduction in food calories would be 97.2% in China, 97.5% in France, 99.7% in Russia, 99.5% in the UK, and 98.9% in the US. In all these countries, virtually everyone who survived the initial blasts would go on to suffer famine. Human extinction. Even 150 teragrams of soot in a nuclear war scenario is many times less than the amount of smoke and other particulate matter released into the atmosphere by an asteroid that struck the Earth 65 million years ago, killing the dinosaurs and about 2/3 of the animal species that lived there. This means that some humans would survive and eventually repopulate the planet, and that the complete extinction of the Homo sapiens species is unlikely. Even after a large-scale nuclear war, however, the vast majority of the human population would suffer extremely violent deaths from burns, radiation, and starvation, and human civilization would probably collapse completely. The survivors would survive on a devastated, uninhabitable planet. It was this shared understanding of the consequences of nuclear Armageddon that led to the 1985 declaration by then U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev that nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Even now, with war raging in Ukraine, it remains as true now as it was then. When children's hospitals and maternity homes are bombed and refugees fleeing are shelled, emotions run high. But in the end, cooler heads must prevail, so that we can step back from the brink of confrontation between Russia and NATO before it is too late. The price of nuclear escalation is planetary suicide, with no winners. It would not save lives in Ukraine, but it would increase the death toll of the current war from thousands to billions. Thank you for watching.